Cheers. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
All right. Thank you for having us, by the way, to everyone here at GeekWire. I just want to start with all of you introducing yourselves. You're all looking at a range of sectors. So take a moment to say what you're looking into, but also your #1 area of investment right now, like the one thing you hope you get in the next year. Rebecca, let's start with you.
So Rebecca Lynn, founder and partner of Canvas Ventures. We do early stage, meaning Series A and B tech companies. I do a lot in financial services and AI. And the #1 thing, I actually did a LiDAR company as well, so I'm a little bit wide-reaching.
But what's the #1 area that you think is super hot that you hope you find?
Yeah, I've been looking at insurance for about 2 years now. And
insurance?
And in the whole insurance space, there's a lot going on
Probably the last thing I would have thought you'd say.
So it's sort of the evolution of banking theme that we've had for a while with Lending Club and Check and Future Advisor. So been looking for that for a while, and so hopefully we'll end up finding something that is really interesting in that sector shortly.
All right, Sarah.
And hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Tavel. I'm one of the general partners at Benchmark. I spent a lot of time hoping that a consumer company will come that can break through the huge incumbencies that we're facing right now, but end up spending more time looking at software as a service, AI, deep learning. And then the #1 space I'm spending the most amount of time on, learning, talking to companies, et cetera, is actually in the cryptocurrency space. So I expect questions on blockchain, and I hope none of you fall asleep if I try to answer them.
All right, Julie.
My name is Julie Sandler, Managing Director at Pioneer Square Labs. We are investing our time and resources pretty aggressively across a number of sectors, particularly in machine learning, and specifically lately spending a lot of time in the space of real estate and rural land parcels.
Wow.
Oh,
Yes.
we should talk.
Okay, before we go to cryptocurrency, what is one area you're not interested in? Like one area that's overhyped, and we'll go reverse direction. Julie.
I think a couple years ago, was spending a lot of time in sort of VR and AR. Right now, it feels like the install base everyone thought was going to be there isn't quite there. About 18 million globally, growing to 90 mil over the next 5 years everywhere. So I think a little bit more bearish on that category lately.
I saw you two nodding.
Yeah, that is the easy answer. I mean, not easy, it's the right answer right now, which is that for the last couple of years, I mean, the inflated, it's the Gartner hype cycle, right? You always go through inflated expectations. We've gone through that. Now there's more the trough of disillusionment, and hopefully we'll start to kind of get out of there as costs, the prices for these hardware devices continues to go down, the quality gets better, but right now it's a long way off.
Do you still think AR, VR, mixed reality will be big, or that it won't be as big as anyone thought it would be?
I mean, so look, VR and AR, they always get grouped together, but they're very different, right? VR, you have to put this big thing on, you're probably at home, it's like, seems to me like a very small amount of your time. AR has the potential to be expansive. It has the potential to be 100% of your time, your awake time, that you're always interacting with it. So in the same way that mobile increased the number of minutes that we spend on the internet, AR is going to do that 5x. And so I think the implications of AR will be huge. It's just when's the technology going to be ready?
Rebecca?
So I actually would say cryptocurrency. Sorry.
All right, good segue, because that's what we're going to talk about. So why?
So I've looked at crypto for a while now as well, and Coinbase has been probably the winner in this space in terms of the exchange. But I think a lot of things that make crypto so interesting are all the things that kind of have to go away in a way. Like it has to be regulated, people have to be known and not anonymous. And in the end, it has to be switched back. So you sort of lose the sort of free rails aspect in a way. So I think there are definite applications of crypto, but I think it was really overhyped for a while.
Sarah, respond.
So look, like, it's actually been, the regulatory question is a big question for crypto, and that's absolutely true. The SEC has been, there's a bunch of different ways in which regulatory questions will come into play. One is with the SEC. And the SEC, you see, is kind of stepping in and saying to some of these, token projects that are emerging. And by the way, I do think token projects is a bubble, and we can talk about that. But
we can talk about ICOs separately.
Yeah, ICOs,
I love
it's
a
true.
certain use case
It's true.
of ICO.
There's kind of Bitcoin, and then there's Ethereum or Ether, and then there's this very, very long tail of alt tokens or alt assets, whatever you want to call it. And the regulation is going to hurt or kind of stymie a lot of what's happening in the ICO market, as it should, because there are a lot of bad things happening there. But there are other questions around regulation. There are things like KYC and AML, and there are startups that are emerging that are going to enable those types of functionality. And so I'm very long Bitcoin. I think that there is something really fundamental happening there. I'm very long the concept of kind of the blockchain, like smart contracts, what you can build on these different types of blockchains. I do think we're early in the non-Bitcoin stuff evolving and maturing.
Well, and with GDPR too rolling in, I think that's going to also limit some of the sort of smart contract issues that companies want to roll in. So that we're seeing that hit in Europe.
Yeah.
And then I think with crypto, like the sort of AML, KYC, like we've seen like Trulio and Demist and Chainalysis and all these companies kind of roll through, and the question is, can one be $1 billion company or not?
I thought it was really interesting. Like just a couple hours ago, Vladimir Putin weighed in on crypto.
The Russians are in it, I'm in.
Well, the Russians are definitely in it.
Like, they're totally in it.
You don't.
It's all
they
the
say
black
that.
market.
Yeah, they say you're always 2 steps away from a Russian mobster and the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Maybe one step away from a Russian
But look,
mobster,
when China kind of came out with their regulatory changes, like shut down a lot of the exchanges. I think the price of Bitcoin was 3,200 or so. And this morning, I don't know how many of you check your Coinbase accounts or your GDEX accounts in the morning, but I think it's around 4,700, 4,800. And so just, we have this situation with Bitcoin in particular where the supply of Bitcoin is limited. We're at 80% of the total number of Bitcoins that will ever be mined. And then the number of Bitcoins that are being mined is slowing down tremendously. And then you've got, this like pent-up demand where there's no ETFs, there's no like hedge funds. Like there's the number of professional investors that are in the market right now is so small. And as these AML providers mature, as other infrastructure parts of the financial services industry mature, there's going to be such an increase in demand that it almost seems like a tautology that Bitcoin will increase in price. It's just the other stuff that is a big question.
So Jamie Dimon says Bitcoin is a fraud.
Yes.
I mean, what are the chances that it's not worth anything?
Well, Jamie Dimon has $1.7 trillion of assets that incent him very heavily to be against something that would potentially disrupt his business.
He and the heads of UBS and Goldman and BlackRock have all come out over the past couple of weeks making commentary around being bearish on this, or even saying, well, I won't begin to speculate. It's not at all surprising. I mean, the very foundation of this technology was established to displace the banks and financial institutions.
Right.
So if they were responding differently, it'd be shocking.
Yeah, and Bitcoin, I think, Bitcoin is fine. I have Bitcoin myself, but in terms of a company, around Bitcoin outside of Coinbase, I've been looking. And the AML, KYC companies, there's probably 15 of them now. And so I don't know if one of those will really emerge as the winner at this point in terms of their unique access to data.
It's a good question. I do think this is one of those markets where regardless of how you invest in the space, you're ultimately taking a leap of faith that it is something real and that it's a small fraction of what it will be 10 years from now. And so if you feel comfortable making that bet, then you can make a bet on what feels like a smaller market now, knowing that in the future it will become bigger.
What about the blockchain? I mean, do you see blockchain, disrupting Facebook, disrupting Google, disrupting the tech monopolies of the day?
I'm personally very skeptical of that. I think that what happens whenever you have a new technology paradigm is that the first people who design and kind of invent things for that platform are really doing it as a port from the prior platform. And so I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the idea of skeuomorphic design. Like, so many of the things that we had designed on our PCs and even our iPhones were meant to look like the physical version. And it wasn't until we started to have people acclimate to that new technology and then actually natively think about, well, what is this technology best suited for? And then what are the apps that we would build to really take advantage of that? Kind of, an example is just like sensors on your iPhone. Like, if you're developing for a web browser, you'll never think about things like GPS or your gyroscope or any of those things. But now that when you think about, oh, there's these new sensors I can take advantage of, what would I invent? That's what needs to happen on the blockchain. And so I think that these ideas when I hear people say Airbnb, like decentralized Airbnb, or Uber, you will order an Uber from the cloud. Like, it just seems like so taking the existing paradigms and trying to port it to the blockchain, when really what excites me and what I'm looking for are the founders who will be able to look around the corner and anticipate what's natively right for the blockchain.
Yeah, like title insurance or something like that, right? Which distributed networks can work for. But I think with GDPR, this right to be forgotten of the consumer that's rolling into Europe, I don't know how that possibly works on a distributed network.
All right. So, line in the sand against cryptocurrency. We got one.
But it's always when I say never that I do something. So
let's talk about the political and economic macro environment right now. We're expecting tax reform. There's a lot of political uncertainty. Is that impacting how you're investing, the choices that you're making? Julie, I'll start with you.
No. I mean, I think if nothing else, in working with, early stage companies from the get-go, the greatest impact comes thinking further down the line, not what investments am I making now, but what will these companies and these management teams have to be thinking really thoughtfully about moving forward. It feels like the tech industry, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, is facing both sort of a tops-down and bottoms-up set of pressures around how you think about workforce acquisition, how you think about talent diversification, with some of the subliminal messaging and overt messaging that we're getting from the very top and the highest offices around, key sources for diversification for our talent pools. I'm really concerned, and so working with entrepreneurs that are being very thoughtful about how they approach talent acquisition and talent development with that in mind is really top of mind for me.
How about you guys?
Well, it affects me because when I wake up in the morning and I read Twitter, I think, fuck.
Wait, what? What was that?
Just like the stuff happening in our highest offices, it's really, it's obviously affecting. But, like Julie said, from an investment standpoint, like, it affects our companies, it affects the companies in terms of their ability to hire, immigration, everything else, regulation coming out of Europe, and just our ability as a country to be able to respond to that. But ultimately, we have to invest on, multi-year, 10-year time horizons, and so you just can't anticipate what the next. You can't make decisions now based on what the next few years will look like.
Especially with this administration.
That's right.
Do you think the economic uncertainty is impacting the startup environment? Is it impacting valuations? Is it impacting funding?
In the healthcare space, it is.
How so?
I would say I did quite a bit, and have done quite a bit in healthcare IT, and didn't make any investments, thank goodness, like kind of betting on Obamacare. But I will tell you that, like, a lot of the companies that were focused in that sector are really struggling, from meaningful use to bundled payments to all of those types of things. Those companies are definitely, I think, very negatively impacted. I focus more on employer paid health, health plans, and that seems steady. But anything that had to do with healthcare reform and healthcare change has been a little stymied. And it's funny because, when I first started looking at healthcare IT, I was told that by investors who invested in healthcare IT in the 80s, right? And they're like, stay very clear of anything, because what's here today may be gone tomorrow. And so I think that's been pretty cyclical throughout the years, no matter what administration was in place.
Do you think we'll see an impact on tech IPOs, tech valuations?
I think that what's affecting us the most is not really the administration, it's just the incredible oversupply of capital just coming into the market.
Very
And so whether that's, at our stage, like we don't feel it. I think, we invest primarily at the Series A and some Series Bs. I think, even the valuations you see at the Series A are high, much higher than when I started my career. Like, I remember when I first started, it was 4x annualized recurring revenue, which now it's 10 to 20.
Well, there's no revenue.
It's like, it's so different. And so when you have, when the multiples you pay is so much higher now than it was 10 years ago, it means that the outcomes for the funds is going to be a fraction of it once was. And it feels even worse for me when I see what happens at the Series B or these large private financings that happen later on. It just means that the need to go public becomes more and more reduced if you're one of these founders. And so I don't think it has anything to do with the public markets themselves. It's more just the availability of capital at the private markets.
Well, I mean, the root cause underlying all of that is, cash right now is just so cheap.
Yes.
Interest rates are so low. Limited partners are reaching for yield, as they say.
Yeah,
so they're pouring all this capital into alternative asset classes.
Bitcoin. It's like everything on Bitcoin.
Or PE and VC.
Exactly.
And so with all this dry powder lying around, the deals get super competitive, valuations get driven up, and then you start to see questions around the whole unicorn syndrome.
Right.
And with the IPO market being what it is, there was a lot of cold water poured on investor appetite earlier this year with the IPOs of Blue Apron and Snap. You're seeing that turn around a little bit with Roku and Switch.
MuleSoft's doing great.
There we go.
There you are.
And I think the IPO pipeline the rest of the year, it's majority tech companies, and with these great examples out there to show how smart growth and strong fundamentals can prove out in public markets, I think there's a good case to be made.
On that note, let's look at the IPO market in the next 2-3 years, Sarah. Uber, of course, the main event, something that people are looking forward to. When's that going to happen?
I don't think she can respond.
Yes. All right. More seriously, we have to talk about this. Uber has had not a little bit of drama over the last few months, and Benchmark has been involved in that, filing a lawsuit against Travis Kalanick, asking him to resign. What do you hope to get out of this?
There's always been two things that we've been focused on for Uber, which is good leadership and good governance. And that is like thanks to Dara, so thank you, Seattle, for this wonderful export. I feel a little guilty being here and having kind of stolen him from the Seattle ecosystem. But we're so thrilled to have him as the CEO of Uber. It's just the right person for the company at this time. And now we're tackling the good governance, and that we are optimistic where things are. Just the board recently unanimously approved some of the kind of governance changes that we think are important. And so if we can get those through, then we'll be, I think, in a really good place.
What's the message to entrepreneurs? Obviously, I'm sure you're thinking about the message that you're sending to the community, and if they're going to take money from Benchmark Capital, do they have to worry about something like this?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always tell people whenever I get this question, and actually, by the way, when I meet with founders, I never get this question because I think it's one of these things where I just tell people, talk to our founders. Like, there's been so much misinformation that's spread, I think, through PR. It's just been such a learning experience to see kind of the facts on the ground versus the story that gets written. And so we just tell people, talk to our founders. Whenever we meet with a company, we give them a full list of every single CEO we've ever worked with. And we say, you choose, you call them. And so the homework that a founder has to do when they're choosing a board member is to do references, and it's the most important thing. And so that's what we say, is just talk to our founders.
There's been, Uber, not aside, certainly at the center of this issue around sexual harassment in the industry, obviously not limited to Uber. We've seen a number of investors be taken down, company CEOs be taken down. I'm curious.
Hollywood executives.
Right. A lot of these things were open secrets.
Yeah.
Rebecca, how did we get to this point?
That's what practically every one of these examples, people knew, right? People absolutely knew, and some of them we chose not to invest in because of it. Because and for a while as an investor, you're sort of scratching your head going, God, maybe I was wrong. You know, maybe I should have invested in that person, even though the reputation was such, as we're hearing now, right? And I think what changed is people suddenly began to care. So a few people were called on the carpet, and then people feel empowered to speak up. And people feel empowered to say, you know, well, that's happening at my company or with this person also, and it's not okay. And it's very much like when you see, you know, sort of sexual offenders, there's a company that's out there that, you know, that encourages people, like they'll report sort of privately, and then when like 2, 3, 4 people all report on the same person, then they'll come forward. And I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing people who were fairly known for bad behavior in different ways, who very early on, when we saw them in the seed or the Series A, it was fairly obvious that was a problem. And people chose to sort of overlook that issue. And the theory, I think, oftentimes is founders are often kind of on the edge, right? Especially of the behavioral spectrum. Sometimes, I've been lucky. Mine have been pretty great so far. But you can choose who to work with and who not to work with, right? So I think, you know, in terms of what we've seen, you know, a lot of people knew early on, and then people are just sort of now acting on it when the behavior got to such a level that it just wasn't tolerated anymore.
So is the onus on, I mean, obviously there's an onus on company leadership, but is there an onus on investors? Is there an onus on LPs? And what should they be doing?
I mean, the onus is on everybody, right? Like, I mean, we're all citizens of this community, and we should all be treating everybody with respect and holding ourselves with high integrity. And I think that, you know, anybody who enables bad behavior, whether it's a VC, whether it's, you know, an LP, whether it's a CEO, is complicit in that bad behavior. And so I think it's, you know, one of the things that I've been happy about all this stuff coming to light is Joanne Wilson wrote this blog post called "The Gig is Up." And it reminds me a little bit of the kind of broken windows theory, which is that if you don't nip things in the bud, they start to snowball and create, you know, bigger problems. And the gig is up. The idea is like, look, we looked the other way. We relied on whispers to help women, help minorities, help whomever understand when someone is a bad actor. And we're not going to, the whisper campaigns don't happen anymore. Like, the stuff gets brought to light. And if we can nip things in the bud, then I think it makes everything.
Does it, though? I mean, I feel like there are still those whispers. We've certainly seen a lot of things come to light. But, you know, some people say that there's more.
There is more. And I mean, you are probably on the receiving end of many of these things. And there are going to be other articles, I'm sure, that come out. But it's, you know, the interesting thing, I think, is that it's gone from whispers in the private sphere that stay in the private sphere to being ones that do cross over now into the public sphere and become known.
I think one thing that leaves a lot of particularly male CEOs and male company leaders and investors and innovators concerned about is, okay, well, what do I do now to make sure that I'm not overcorrecting? There was a piece, I think it was maybe in the New York Times this morning, about the fact that women innovators are actually being punished because the male CEOs and VPs of engineering are canceling lunches and, you know, canceling one-on-one meetings and overcorrecting, and as a result, you know, women are actually losing, you know, valuable mentorship and opportunity and access within the company. So it's a fine line to walk for everybody, but, you know, I think in all of this, asking, you know, men this question, what are you doing to create a zero tolerance policy, is just as important as, you know, asking the broader industry.
So I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room here, the pretty amazing one, which is that in an industry starved of women, we have 3 amazing women on this stage, and this is not a women in tech panel. This is not a diversity panel. This is a panel about the future of innovation. And you all, you know, have risen to the top in a very male-dominated field. Sexual harassment is one thing, and I think that the lines there are clear, even if they do get crossed. Discrimination is another. How do we change the culture? How do we make it so that more women like you can get to the top? No easy answers, I know.
I mean, I feel like, I mean, my answer for this is always lead by example, right? And I think a lot of it is role models and what you set out there for other women, right? And I think a lot of it, I have a young daughter who's 11 and one who's 4. And I think a lot of it is expectation setting and role models. And I was just looking at a book outside, and I'm sure it's a great book, but it was all about like this, sort of rebellious girls, right? But I got to tell you, like, the examples are not sort of world leaders and things like that. We just don't have enough of those examples yet. And so I think what we have to continue to do is to lead by example wherever we have the chance. And for our boys too. I mean, I have a 7-year-old son, and when I was in the journal, that was this big picture. It was really embarrassing, and he whipped it out and like took it to school, right? And he was so proud, and it was the cutest thing in the world,
That's really great.
And so I think it's important to not forget the boys, and that really it's them in the end of the day who are going to speak up, who are like, hey, that's not cool, that's my sister, right? That kind of behavior, I think, is what we have to reward.
Yeah, on the topic of role models, I think one of the great things about one of the few great things about this issue coming to light over the past year is the fact that it's becoming less a sort of a women's issue, less of a diversity issue, and more a business issue. It's become an industrial imperative to figure this out. And within companies, I mean, just about every company represented in this room, you do have women leaders on your payroll, and figuring out how to elevate them and make them more visible is a huge component to this. There's a great documentary out there called Misrepresentation, and the famous Edelman quote, "You can't be what you can't see." If you've got great rising leaders in your organization, and you've got a piece being written about a new product launching in GeekWire or Bloomberg, have that person quoted. If you're hosting your annual conference, put them up on stage, have them on your hiring panels, make sure that there are patterns being established and models created that leaders across your organization, men and women, particularly women or underrepresented groups, have there visible that can be emulated and learned from.
Yeah, and I hesitate too. Like I struggle with the sort of the all women panels and things like that, because I think early in my career in venture, they said, oh, you're going to be the best, woman VC. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Okay, at that time, the bar was fairly low. I'm like, no, I'm going to be one of the best VCs, right? And so I think not trying to bucket women, in that way, and just sort of saying that they isn't even, not treating them differently. And that's where this sort of overcorrection becomes really troubling in a way, right? Because you do overcorrect to some extent, and then it causes more problems.
I mean, I kind of think of it as a carrot and a stick. And so the carrot is what both Julie and Rebecca said, which is, I think we have to kick ass, because we have to show that by not having women on your team, you're going to miss out. Like, I experienced this actually when I was at Bessemer, and one of the deals I sourced while I was there was Pinterest. And I remember actually, like, my sourcing Pinterest, I know for a fact, resulted in probably 3 women being hired at other venture firms. Because the guys would come up to me, these GPs there, and be like, we heard that this woman at Bessemer sourced this company, Pinterest. Like, we totally missed it. We looked at the product and didn't get it at all. And that was the trigger that got us to hire a woman. And so it's the same thing for us, is that we have to show that by not having a woman around the table, not having another person of color, any other minority at the table, you're going to miss out. That's the carrot. The stick is a little bit, it's the shame on you. It's the, thank you to you and Kara Swisher and everybody else who beats the drum, because frankly, you should be embarrassed and ashamed if you have a team of just white men. Like, that is not acceptable anymore. And I think that increasingly people weren't aware that that wasn't acceptable, but now that the stick is happening, the first step is awareness, and then the second step is actually doing something from that. And you have at Pinterest, we did a number of things where we made sure that we actually had recruiters, and those recruiters were focused on sourcing candidates from more diverse pools. We did analysis of our hiring and interview process and found where bias existed in the interview process itself to make sure that we didn't have that bias there. And so there are tools out there. We just haven't yet started to use the tools, but as people become more and more aware of both the carrot and the stick, I do think it helps.
Are you guys doing anything more intentionally to source female entrepreneurs or invest in female entrepreneurs?
I mean, I'll often take take a closer look. Because I mean, and it's funny, when I first started in venture, like a decade ago almost now, right? It was really hard, to be honest, to find female entrepreneurs, which is odd because before that you had the whole class of female entrepreneurs of Ann Winblad and Heidi Rosen and Janice Roberts, and like there was this whole like, you know, pretty significant class of female entrepreneurs, and then they just kind of went away, and now I feel like they're reemerging. So. And for a while, there were a lot of female entrepreneurs, but it was all more shopping-oriented kinds of things, and I'm not you know, and that wasn't really where I was investing. Now you're seeing some amazing female entrepreneurs in AI, a lot in machine learning and statistics and data science, and I feel like the problem will, over time, be solved because part of it was where a lot of the startups are being sourced from was computer science. And CS was probably 10 to 18% women, depending on the time in the university. That's rapidly changing, and now you're seeing companies in neuroscience, right? You're seeing a lot of things in the amazing biology companies, and even machine learning and AI is much more heavy with women, essentially. So I feel like some of that will already be correcting itself. I mean, even if you look at the medical schools, I think there's 60% women. Vet schools are 90%. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I feel like I don't want to fight the last war, you know, in terms of, you know, I feel like the CS stuff, largely that's just, you know, putting a puzzle together these days. But when you look forward and you look at the degrees the women are in, I actually do think those are the startup opportunities of the future.
Yeah, I mean, I shook my head no, and then I realized that it's what I do every day. You know, like I'm always networking with women. I am always, you know, I think in VC it's always about what's your edge, you know, and like part of my one facet of what makes me strong as a VC is that I do tap into a network that my male colleagues don't tap into as much, and male partners elsewhere. And so I think it's something that I'm always looking for. And you know, when I was at Greylock, I led 2 investments. One of them was founded and led by a woman. And so I think it happens. You know, it's not intentional for me, but it actually is happening. That's pretty big effort.
Yeah, I'd echo what Sarah said. Actually. Not by any intention, but just by virtue of that exact effect. My last firm I worked at, every investment that I led had a female co-founder.
That's amazing.
Just because of the fact that you do bring a diverse network. I'd say now on the startup studio side of the equation, I spend a lot of time working with women CEOs on fundraising in particular, particularly given the fact that you're competing with a whole new class of usually male entrepreneurs who are pitching before and after you. And there are so many compelling, powerful women who pitch beautifully side by side, but for one reason or another, a lot of male entrepreneurs bring a little bit more of that swagger, that sort of braggadocio mentality in terms of selling and pounding the table when they're pitching. And what I always say to women founders is if you aren't leaving that first and second meeting feeling like the most braggy, swaggery version of yourself, you're probably not anywhere close to what your male counterparts are doing in those partner meetings and those initial pitches. And again, broad swaths, but
I call it. I'm like I tell them sometimes, and we've had some women have just like knocked the cover off the ball. We just did an investment that hasn't been announced for this woman is just incredible. But when they're a little bit more laid back, I'm like, just ask yourself what Don Draper would do, right? And like, let's just play Don Draper for about 10 minutes, right? And we're going to do Q&A. And I push them to the other extreme just so they feel how that feels. Not wanting to change them, but just oftentimes when you're trying something new out, you just have to kind of test it. And so it's that whole, and they always get a kick out of it. And I'm like, okay, don't do that. But like, you got to have that kind of a different frame when you go in to ask for money, right? And don't tell. And so it's really interesting trying to help them do that.
So let's talk about AI. And everybody, it seems everybody has a startup that involves AI. All the big companies are pushing. I think Microsoft has 8,000 employees working on AI. Is this area overhyped? And are there risks associated with it?
So I often say AI just means algorithm involved these days.
which is every tech company, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I lost my thing. I mean, every company we talk to practically, says they're AI. And some of them really are. And I think there are use cases for it. But we picked our investment in Crowdflower because they enable all of the AI. They help companies make their AI and machine learning actually work. And Microsoft is now an investor along with Salesforce and others. So, I think there are broad platform plays in AI. There are also some vertical plays. But we usually prefer more of the platform kind of network effect plays in AI. But what do you think, Sarah?
I mean, I hate the term AI because I think it overstates what we have right now. Like, I mean,
Yes.
we think about deep learning, CNNs. But, I think, I think deep learning is going to be something that permeates everything. Like, it's really hard to create a startup that's just around deep learning because really what you want is an application that solves a use case and leverages deep learning, AI, to enable a new use case. And I think that the challenge with companies going after this is, for me, twofold. Both relate to the same thing, which is the incumbents. What you need for deep learning, like at Pinterest, I was responsible for our discovery team, which was our search, our recommendations, our computer vision team. We were the first team at Pinterest to bring deep learning into what we were doing on the back end. And we were able to do things that no other company could do, no startup could do, because we had this incredible data set that all these users had created for us that we could then build on top of. And you need that data set in order to create an experience. And guess who has the best data sets? It's the companies that already have huge user bases. And the second thing is that the people you need to do this work are expensive. And they're expensive because Google and Apple and Facebook, and name your incumbent, are paying them a lot of money to be there. And so when you're a startup and you're, particularly in Silicon Valley, this is actually a wonderful advantage that Seattle has, and you have rents that are super expensive, property values that are super expensive, an engineer, is going to look at the choices and think, maybe I'll go to Google and make $1 million a year, whatever it is. And so it's possible for these startups to create companies that take advantage of deep learning, but there's always a cold start problem that's pretty hard.
What do you think about the dangers of AI? I mean, is it robots taking over the world, like Elon Musk says? Is it everybody losing their jobs?
Yeah.
Is it the unknown, because there is so much that we don't know?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think with any hot trend, as we were talking about earlier, Emily, I think there's a lot of effervescence, people taking very strong points of view on either side of it. I think as an investor, I worry less about that. I think about, to Sarah's point around the next 10 years, what innovations, what advantages can be gleaned by virtue of this technology or trend in the near term. I think about the unique timing we're at now where machine learning and deep learning have a really unique ability to create significant change and improvements to the way we live our lives, to the way we diagnose disease, to the way we understand our genome, that I get more excited about the implications for the next generation rather than what's going to happen when the cyborg army attacks in 2070.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of more. I'm also a lawyer in my old life, but I have a lot of interest in like the moral and ethical implications of AI. So in law, if you make a mistake, like say you're driving a car, you're operating on a patient, there's always this reasonable man sort of case. Like, did you do what a reasonable man would have done, or woman, right? And in the case maybe in that situation, and there's some leeway. So when AI kicks in, like what's your grounds, right? Is it a reasonable machine? How do you code for that ethical base? The autonomous car, and you're going to take out somebody, the passenger, the old lady in the middle of the street, or the kid beside it, right? Now who is it? And so I think with AI, you're going to have, as this evolves, like all of those things that we sort of allow room of a margin of error in, because if we act, no humans aren't perfect. If you go into you sort of hit common carrier almost, where there's no degree of error allowed, and then how do you make those legal and ethical judgments in that world? And that's where I think we're going to struggle as a society more than anywhere else.
I know you've been thinking about this, Sarah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, well, I was a philosophy major in college, so I think about this stuff a lot because it's, to Rebecca's point exactly, this is so, a standard philosophy question is, if you're driving down, I don't know how many of you guys know the trolley question, where
Yes.
it's like, if you're driving down, a train track and you're going to hit, a family, and if you switch a lever and it goes to the other track, you kill one person. Like, is that the right ethical decision to make? And it's just, there are some engineers sitting in a room in Tesla who is, creating a max or min function on number of people that you kill. Like, and that is
scary.
insane
That
to
is
me,
scary.
and like they're taking into account who is more vulnerable. Like, if we turn to the right, it's a car, and so it's less likely to die than if we turn to the left and it's a biker with a helmet. But what if you're driving down and there's a biker with a helmet and without a helmet? Like, what do you do? Like, do you hit the one with the helmet because they're less vulnerable than the one with the helmet? I mean, it's so interesting to me that these decisions, like, I know that.
Well, and then too, they could get into like just capabilities, right? What if one's disabled and one's not, right?
Right.
Yes. I mean,
There's
all of
so
these
many.
like really,
Yeah.
really
and
scary
so,
things.
like, I know Elon talked. It's almost a distraction. It's like, oh, let's worry about generalized AI, which is not, not anywhere near actually possible, so that we don't worry about the small decisions that are happening every day, every code commit. By an engineer somewhere. And autonomous vehicles is like the clearest, like most real life and death use case. But there are things everywhere where, like the example I gave with Pinterest, you're taking a data set and then you're extrapolating from that data set. If that data set has any bias, guess what? We're extrapolating to bias. And so there are like great examples where like you put your hand under a hand dryer and like if you're white, it works. If you're a person of color, guess what? It doesn't work because there was no one there testing to see whether like it would reflect off of their skin, and like actually work. And so it's a super interesting space. And I think, like any technology that comes out, it will be used to good and it will be used to bad, and we have to be aware of the bad.
So on that question, we've got 40 seconds left, but you guys are making the decision at the very earliest levels what to invest. How are you thinking about this in your calculation? Tech for good, tech for bad. How could this be used in the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're in an amazing job and an amazing role to be able to make those kinds of decisions. And so I always look, I have to sleep with myself at night, right? And so I'm in these investments for 10 years oftentimes, and so it's got to have a good bottom line to it.
Yeah, same. I mean, I saw a pitch where it was like, we're going to automate the cashier who sits in the cafeteria and rings you up. And I was just like, why would I want to spend, like, why would you want to spend the next 10 years of your life, like, eliminating these jobs with a technology that doesn't seem that interesting to me? Like, it just, I think it's an ethical question that we should be asking ourselves more and more.
You get to contribute one verse.
Right.
What do you want your verse to be, both at the individual level, at the organizational, and the philosophical level? And I think that that's the case for a lot of our peers as well.
You guys are amazing. Rebecca Lynn, Sarah
Thank you so
Tavel, Julie Sandler, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great to have you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.